to make a deal very badly. They might not say that to you, but they want to make it very badly. I have another $250 billion worth of tariffs to put on if we don't make a deal. And believe me, I'll be putting them on.
President Trump earlier this week warning that the U.S. would proceed with a threat to impose additional tariffs on $250 billion worth of Chinese products if Washington and Beijing don't reach a deal on trade, signaling that tough negotiations are ahead as the two sides prepare to meet at the G20 summit, which begins next week in Buenos Aires. President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping scheduled to sit down on the sidelines of that summit, their first face-to-face meeting in nearly a year. So what should we expect? Let's ask John Murphy. He's a senior vice president for international policy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Welcome back, John. Good to see you. So the president says China wants to do a deal badly. How do you size up the incentive on both sides to do a deal?
Well, I think the administration has a good diagnosis about the industrial policies and trade practices that China has undertaken that are a problem. They deserve to be confronted, specifically the theft of intellectual property, the forced technology transfer policies. But so far, it's unclear just how this is going to play out. This is a meeting where there hasn't been that much staff work to prepare for it yet. It's difficult to say that a deal is ripe, and U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer has released an updated report about the details on these industrial policies that suggests that, in his view, it's not exactly time for a deal yet. So we may see this linger on for quite a lot longer. Yeah, I mean, it seems to me the president is correct in that the Chinese economy is feeling some pressure from the tariffs and a slowing growth. No question that there's some capital flight out of China. And yet, if you look at the United States, we seem to be slowing down too. I mean, you can see in the business investment figures that there's some uncertainty that's affecting business investment in the United States from trade. Would you? How do you diagnose on either side the weight of incentives to do a deal? Right. I think that's absolutely right, that across the United States, we're seeing the impact. In agriculture, China historically has been buying 30% of all U.S. production of soybeans, for instance, the top crop grown in the United States. And that's been just switched off this year. So that's been felt, and other crops as well. And for manufacturing as well, we're seeing a lot of the inputs that have come from China, raw materials and components that have gone into U.S. manufactured goods are more expensive. Companies don't like talking about it that much, that their costs are going up, but the pain is there underneath the surface. And you see it in construction as well, where a lot of the input costs, you see prices rising.
Well, the president needs a strong economy. I mean, if he goes into re-election year with 2% growth a la Obama or worse, I think he's going to lose. So, I mean, sooner or later, he's got to do a deal. Is this something that, for that reason, is this something that has to be done, a deal to remove the uncertainty on China trade in the early part of 2019 at the latest?
Well, certainly pressure is going to be mounting because those tariffs that we're slapping on China are actually taxes paid by Americans. And that's why we at the Chamber think they're the wrong approach. So we do think that this is going to linger on a bit longer, but the pressure is going to be there mounting, I think, day by day, especially if after January 1st we see a lot of those 10% tariffs ratchet up to the 25% level.
All right, let me turn to NAFTA here. The new NAFTA passed. The president signed it with Mexico and Canada. U.S.-Mexico agreement, Canadian agreement. Normally you would think that would be something to be voted on in the next Congress, but Pat Toomey, the Republican senator from Pennsylvania, has come out and said, with 11 other Republican senators, Mr. President, sign the deal before the end of the month and get a vote on it before the end of this Congress. Is that realistic?
Probably not. You know, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said that he just doesn't think there's time, and I think other trade leaders in Congress look at it that way. You would really have to have everything lined up, and as you know, Paul, there's many other items on the agenda here for the lame duck session.
Well, but I'll tell you what, it looks to me like the politics of this are not going well for the next Congress. You're already hearing Democrats saying, well, okay, this bill, this NAFTA deal. We'll look at it, but you're going to have to do several things before we'll even consider a vote. For example, you're going to have to tighten up the enforcement provisions. You're going to have to do more on labor protections and environmental protections. The environmental lobby is lined up totally against it, and the AFL-CIO is lukewarm on it. So I guess my question is this going to have a hard time passing a Democratic House?
There's certainly going to be a lot of wheeling and dealing and a lot of talk about how to enhance the enforcement provisions in the agreement. And we at the Chamber see a number of things you could do to prepare the way. One that we think is a priority is to lift the tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada and Mexico. The administration had pledged that these would go away as soon as a new NAFTA deal was struck, and yet still they're there. We think that addressing issues like that could help build support across both sides of the aisle.
Well, but that would certainly increase support among some Republicans, but that's not going to get you Sherrod Brown's vote in Ohio, for example, is it? I mean, how many Democrats is that really going to turn?
So I think that in the incoming House of Representatives, there are quite a few new members coming in who are Democrats who spoke out against tariffs. It was an interesting cycle in that sense. So it's too early to say, but there is interest in working on these trade issues on both sides of the aisle, I think.